So picture this. You are stepping down into the subterranean war room of the British Admiralty. It's 1941.
Right into the thick of it.
Exactly. The air in this bunker is, well, it's completely stagnant, thick with cigarette smoke, raw tension everywhere. You've got officers hunched over these massive tables, orchestrating this high-stakes, life-or-death chess match across the freezing North Atlantic.
Hunting down Nazi Germany's most powerful battleship.
Yeah, the Bismarck. But then you pull the camera back, past the maps, past the uniforms, and you see blinding studio lights. You see boom microphones, a director yelling, "Cut!"
Because you aren't in 1941 at all.
Nope, you are in 1960. And the history you're watching is actively being rewritten by Hollywood, a hit country music song, and amazingly, the British government's official Secrets Act. Welcome to a brand new deep dive. I'm your host, and today we're exploring the 1960 British war film, Sink the Bismarck.
And I am thrilled to be your expert for this one. Our mission today for you, the listener, is to explore the incredibly complex, often messy gap between history and the silver screen.
It's a huge gap, too.
Oh, massive. We are going to deconstruct how a film tries to capture the physical reality of war, why it sometimes fundamentally alters the truth for the sake of a compelling narrative. And I think most fascinatingly, how actual top-secret classified government intelligence literally forced the screenwriters to invent history out of thin air.
I mean, by the end of this deep dive, the way you watch historical narratives unfold on screen is going to fundamentally change. The detective work behind how this movie was constructed is just sheer fun for us to dig into.
It really is.
Primarily because the creators of Sink the Bismarck went to extraordinary, almost obsessive lengths to make this film feel like a factual, gritty documentary, even while they were actively bending the truth.
Yeah, director Lewis Gilbert and producer John Brayborn made some highly unusual stylistic choices right out of the gate to achieve that exact effect.
Like what?
Well, for one, they chose to shoot the film in black and white CinemaScope. And remember, by 1960, vibrant color was widely available.
Right, it was the standard for those massive historical epics.
Exactly. But they deliberately handicapped themselves with black and white so they could seamlessly intercut their newly shot studio scenes with actual, authentic, wartime newsreel footage.
Which is brilliant because, I mean, if you suddenly cut from crisp 1960s color film to grainy 1940s combat footage, the audience is immediately pulled out of the illusion.
Oh, for sure. The black and white made that transition totally invisible. And they didn't just rely on visual tricks either. They brought in the legendary CBS radio correspondent Ed Murrow to literally play himself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he sat in his studio and reprised the actual famous wartime broadcasts he had made from London back during the Blitz.
That anchors the entire fiction in this undeniable, recognizable, sonic reality.
It creates a profound near-documentary aesthetic. And the film was highly unusual for its era in another structural way, too. You know, most war films of the 50s and 60s focused almost entirely on frontline combat.
Right, the mud of the trenches, the adrenaline in the fighter cockpits, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sink the Bismarck, however, dedicated a massive amount of its runtime to the unsung, exhausted backroom planners. It treated the intelligence gathering, the map reading, and the strategic plotting as just as thrilling as the naval battles themselves.
And it paid off massively. I mean, it was the #2 film at the British box office in 1960. But here is the anomaly that really stands out to me. It was also a massive, out-of-nowhere hit in the United States.
Which makes zero sense on paper.
None at all. There was no American involvement in the actual battle, at least officially. And a previous British war film, directed by Gilbert, Reach for the Sky, had completely flopped with American audiences. So how did this incredibly British, highly strategic, map-heavy film conquer America?
Well, the American box office was boosted by an estimated $500,000, which was a staggering sum of money in 1960, by the way, purely because of a country pop song.
Right, Johnny Horton's song, Sink the Bismarck. It hit #3 on the U.S. pop and country charts. But the wild part is it wasn't an official tie-in.
Not at all.
The filmmakers didn't commission it. It never actually appears anywhere in the movie.
It's crazy. The American studio distributors just realized they had a hit song on the radio about the exact same topic, so they just slapped it over the promotional trailers in the U.S. to ride its coattails.
It is a phenomenal early example of viral marketing. It's perfectly analogous to how today a modern movie might blow up at the box office entirely because some unofficial fan-made audio track goes viral on TikTok.
Yes, the studio just quietly adopts the hype.
It proves that sometimes, the marketing ecosystem completely outpaces the actual content of the art.
Absolutely. The marketing undeniably got American audiences into the theater seats. But once those viewers were sitting in the dark, the filmmakers faced a severe narrative hurdle.
Because they had committed to this dry documentary aesthetic.
Right, focusing on the back rooms, but a purely factual recitation of ship coordinates being moved across a map for 2 hours.
Yeah.
That isn't going to hold an audience's emotional attention. They needed a human anchor in that room.
Imagine you're sitting in that subterranean windowless bunker. The writers needed you to feel the stakes. So they injected pure fiction right into the center of the real-world admiralty.
Enter Captain Jonathan Shepard and WRNS Second Officer Ann Davis.
Played by Kenneth Moore and Dana Winter. And just to clarify for the listener, WRNS stands for the Women's Royal Naval Service. These were the women who were physically responsible for interpreting the incoming data and moving the ship models on those massive plotting tables.
Crucial work.
Oh.
But Captain Shepard, however, is entirely fictional. The actual director of operations in the Admiralty at that time was a man named Captain R.A.B. Edwards.
But the writers needed someone the audience could emotionally bleed with.
Exactly. So they gave this fictional Captain Shepard a son who was serving out in the Navy.
Right.
During the battle, his son's plane goes missing. This forces Shepard into this agonizing position.
He has to desperately separate his icy, ruthless professional demeanor from his profound personal grief as a father, all while ordering other men's sons into a meat grinder.
It's heavy. And they even shoehorn in a subtle romance to break the tension.
Oh, right. At the very end of the film, after the Bismarck is finally sunk, Shepard asks Officer Davis out for a 9:00 p.m. dinner date.
And she kindly points out that they have been awake and locked in this artificially lit bunker for so many days, he doesn't even realize it's actually 9:00 in the morning.
So they go out for breakfast instead.
It highlights the extreme, disorienting nature of the environment they were working in.
I hear that, but I have to push back on this entire creative choice. Doesn't this become a slippery slope? I mean, if we excuse erasing the real Captain Edwards and his actual contributions just because a fictional guy with a missing son makes for a better, more emotional movie, aren't we just admitting that actual history is too boring?
That's a fair point.
Aren't we just giving history a cheap Hollywood facelift?
You are hitting on the eternal tension of historical cinema. Is it disrespectful to the real people? Perhaps. But we have to look at the limitations of the medium.
How?
Well, for a film to succeed in 1960, it had to translate vast, impersonal, continent-spanning events into individual, relatable human drama. The real Captain Edwards did a phenomenal job, but his internal emotional life during those specific days isn't part of the public historical record.
Right, we don't have transcripts of his private fears.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
By creating the fictional Shepard, the filmmakers could externalize the immense, crushing psychological pressure that everyone in that room was feeling. It is a dramatic composite.
I see.
It sacrifices the literal, factual truth of who was standing at the desk in order to capture the emotional truth of what it felt like to bear that responsibility.
I suppose that makes sense when you frame it as a limitation of the historical record, but that brings us to the most incredible part of this entire story, because there was one part of Captain Shepard's fictional brilliance that wasn't just a screenwriting whim to make him look good.
No, it was a legally mandated cover-up.
Yeah. So in the movie, the hunt for the Bismarck completely stalls when the British cruisers lose radar contact in the fog. The trail goes cold.
And suddenly, Captain Shepard has this brilliant, almost psychic instinct.
He bets the entire pursuit, and arguably the safety of the Atlantic, on his gut feeling that the Bismarck, which had been hit and was leaking oil, is heading south to the French coast, specifically to the port of Brest, for repairs.
And his hunch pays off. He looks like an absolute tactical genius.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, he didn't guess anything.
Nope. The British knew exactly where the Bismarck was going because they were reading the German mail.
The intelligence services at Bletchley Park had successfully intercepted and decoded a Luftwaffe Enigma transmission.
Oh.
A high-ranking German official had sent a message inquiring about the Bismarck's status, and the response explicitly stated the battleship was headed for Brest.
Wow.
But even beyond the decrypted messages, the British were utilizing a technique called traffic analysis.
Traffic analysis is fascinating because it doesn't even require you to break the code. It's like realizing your neighbor is throwing a massive surprise party, not because you heard them explicitly say it, but because you look out the window and see 5 different pizza delivery cars pull up to their house.
That is a perfect way to explain it.
You don't know what kind of pizza they ordered, but the volume of traffic alone tells you exactly what's happening.
Yes, and direction-finding stations across Britain picked up the radio signals from the Bismarck. They couldn't read every word, but they saw that the Bismarck had stopped communicating with its naval command in Wilhelmshaven, Germany.
And suddenly started communicating with German command in Paris.
Exactly. The geographic shift in who the ship was talking to, combined with the sheer volume of the signals, gave away the destination before the ship even got close.
So the obvious question for anyone listening is, why on earth didn't the filmmakers put that in the movie? Breaking the Enigma code and using traffic analysis sounds like an incredibly tense, dramatic scene.
Because they legally couldn't. I mean, the film was produced in 1960, the massive intelligence operations at Bletchley Park, the existence of the Enigma machine, and the fact that the Allies had broken the German codes. All of that remained highly classified, top-secret government information until 1975.
That's 15 years after the movie came out.
The filmmakers literally were not allowed to tell the truth. If they had shown Bletchley Park, they would have been violating the Official Secrets Act. So they had to invent a fictional hero and make him look like he just had the luckiest, most brilliant guess in the history of naval warfare.
It fundamentally changes how you view historical genius on screen. It's exactly like watching your friend perfectly predict every single twist, turn, and jump scare in a mystery movie. You're sitting on the couch calling them a genius.
Right.
And then 15 years later, you find out they had already read the Wikipedia plot summary on their phone in the bathroom before the movie started. The brilliance was an illusion created by withheld information.
And because of those strict secrecy laws, the film had to invent not just the how of the intelligence, but the where.
Oh, that's right. The film places the Central Intelligence Operation right there in the Admiralty in London.
But the actual nerve center for the Battle of the Atlantic, the place where the pursuit of the Bismarck was truly orchestrated, was Derby House in Liverpool.
Why Liverpool?
Because Liverpool was the headquarters of Western Approach's command. It was physically closer to the Atlantic convoys, meaning communication lines were shorter and more direct. But again, the real mechanisms and locations of the intelligence war were just too deeply sensitive to put on a movie screen in 1960.
Because the Cold War was raging.
Exactly. And the methods of signals intelligence were still vital national secrets.
So we have a heavily sanitized, fictionalized war room. But what happens when we leave the bunker and translate those little dots on the map into the freezing, chaotic reality of the North Atlantic? Because out on the water, the filmmakers significantly streamlined the incredibly messy mechanics of naval combat.
Naval combat between capital ships is astonishingly complex. I mean, it relies on geometry, weather, and mathematics just as much as firepower. The film drastically simplifies these tactics to make them legible to a general audience.
Give us an example.
Well, during the initial catastrophic engagement at the Battle of the Denmark Strait, the film shows the British ships, the HMS Hood, and the Prince of Wales, turning early in the fight so they can fire their full broadsides at the German ships.
Which means they turn sideways to the enemy so every single gun on the ship can fire at once.
Yeah.
But that isn't what Admiral Holland, the British commander, actually did.
No, he sought to close the distance first. Holland drove his ships directly toward the Germans
Why would he do that?
to present a much smaller target profile. If you point the nose of your ship at the enemy, you are a very narrow target. But the tactical trade-off is severe. By pointing their bows directly at the Bismarck, the British essentially blinded their own rear guns.
Because their aft guns couldn't shoot through their own ship's superstructure.
Right. It cost them the use of 8 massive guns, cutting their firepower in half. Meanwhile, the Bismarck and its escort, the Prince Eugen, were already turned sideways, firing full broadsides of every main weapon they had. It put the British at a massive, fatal disadvantage.
And the film also completely leaves out a rather embarrassing mistake made by the British right at the start of that battle. The HMS Hood initially fired at the wrong ship.
They did. They mistook the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen for the Bismarck and targeted it instead.
How does a highly trained crew mistake a cruiser for a battleship?
Because of the mist, the freezing sea spray, and the fact that the German Navy deliberately designed the Prince Eugen to have a very similar silhouette to the Bismarck.
Ah, that makes sense.
In the chaotic, low-visibility conditions of the North Atlantic, the British wasted crucial, life-saving minutes firing at the wrong target. before correcting their fire.
It wasn't just the tactical mistakes they left out either. The filmmakers really narrowed the focus to make it an exclusively triumphantly British narrative. They scrubbed some incredible international contributions from the record.
Yeah, they really did.
For example, after the Bismarck escapes into the fog, it is finally relocated by a Catalina flying boat. The film shows the plane, but it conspicuously leaves out the fact that the plane was actually co-piloted by an American Naval Reserve officer, Ensign Leonard Smith.
Which again touches on deeply sensitive political realities. The United States was officially neutral in May of 1941, revealing that an active-duty American military officer was secretly participating in a British combat operation months before the attack on Pearl Harbor was a detail that both governments preferred to quietly obscure for a very long time.
They also left out the Polish destroyer, the Piorun. This tiny ship heroically charged straight at the massive guns of the Bismarck, signaling "I am a Pole," as it sailed headlong into the fray. I mean, the sheer cinematic gold of that moment is undeniable.
It is brilliant, but it complicates the specific, streamlined narrative the British studios were trying to build for their domestic audience.
Yeah.
And this curation of facts extends to the darkest moments of the battle as well.
They sanitize the incredibly grim aftermath.
Completely. The film skips over the fact that after the Bismarck was finally battered into a sinking wreck, the British cruiser HMS Dorsetshire began rescuing German survivors from the freezing water. But suddenly, the British ship departed, abandoning hundreds of German sailors to drown in the ocean.
Because the British suspected a German U-boat was operating in the area. And if you stop a massive cruiser in the water to pick up survivors, you become a completely stationary target for a torpedo.
Precisely. It was the brutal, unyielding calculus of war. To save the enemy in the water meant risking the lives of every British sailor on board.
When a film strips away the embarrassing mistakes, like firing at the wrong ship, and removes the dark, horrific realities like leaving hundreds of men to freeze and drown, are we really teaching history to the audience, or are we just creating a comforting mythology for the victors?
Sink the Bismarck is undeniably a piece of comforting mythology. We have to remember it was released in 1960. The British public had endured horrific generational trauma during the war. Whole cities had been flattened.
Right, they had been through hell.
They wanted to see a reflection of their own resilience, their competence, and their moral clarity. Acknowledging that their victory involved terrible tactical blunders or ruthless, agonizing decisions like abandoning drowning men muddies that moral clarity.
So the filmmakers chose to present an idealized, sanitized version of the victory.
One that validated the immense sacrifices the country had made. And of course, just as a disclaimer for you listening, we aren't taking a side on whether this sanitation was right or wrong. We're just impartially looking at how the primary sources reflect this shift from historical reality to cinematic narrative.
Which brings us to how they handled the enemy. Because if the film simplified the British heroes to make them look infinitely competent and righteous, it did the exact opposite to the German commander.
Oh, yes.
They completely assassinated the actual historical character of Admiral Günther Lütjens. They rewrote his personality to fit a very convenient cinematic trope.
The movie portrays the German fleet commander, Admiral Lütjens, as a crazed, unyielding, stereotypical Nazi zealot. He is depicted pacing the bridge, blindly and fanatically convinced that the Bismarck is an unsinkable superweapon destined to crush the British Navy.
But the historical truth about Lütjens is shockingly different.
Completely different. Historically, Lütjens was a traditional naval officer who actually did not agree with Nazi policies.
Really?
Yes, he was one of the very few high-ranking naval commanders who had formally and publicly protested the brutality of the anti-Semitic crimes committed during Kristallnacht.
And when Adolf Hitler actually came to visit the Bismarck before it launched on its mission, Lütjens deliberately refused to give the Nazi salute to Hitler. Instead, he gave the traditional naval salute.
It was a subtle, incredibly dangerous display of his separation from the ideological fanaticism of the regime.
Furthermore, far from being a crazed zealot who believed his ship was invincible, Lütjens was highly pessimistic about the Bismarck's mission.
He understood the strategic reality. He knew that trying to break out into the Atlantic while being hunted by the entire Royal Navy was a daunting, highly dangerous, and likely doomed task.
The movie even flips his actual combat orders to make him look more bloodthirsty. In the film, when the British ships first appear on the horizon, Lütjens is eager to fight and immediately orders his ship to open fire on the HMS Hood.
But in reality, it was the exact opposite.
Right.
In the actual battle, Lütjens explicitly ordered his ship to avoid engaging the British. His overarching mission was to sneak into the Atlantic to sink undefended merchant supply ships, not to get into a lethal slugging match with enemy battleships.
So who fired the guns?
It was actually the Bismarck's captain, Ernst Lindemann. He became infuriated by the British fire, refused Lütjen's order, and commanded the guns to open fire. The film completely reverses this dynamic, stripping the nuance from the German command and putting the aggression entirely onto Lütjen's.
It perfectly illustrates Hollywood's absolute need for a Darth Vader. War is fought by complex, deeply compromised, often terrified human beings on all sides.
But audiences in 1960 didn't want a nuanced, conflicted German commander. They didn't want a guy who didn't even want to be there and knew he was likely going to die.
They just wanted a black and white cartoon villain they could cheer against without feeling an ounce of guilt when the ship finally went down.
Is the psychological utility of the villain in narrative storytelling. If the audience recognizes the humanity, the reluctance, or the dread of the enemy commander, the triumph of sinking his ship becomes tinged with profound tragedy.
Right.
By turning Lütjens into a fanatic, the film gives the audience absolute permission to celebrate the destruction of the Bismarck without any lingering moral ambiguity.
We have covered a massive amount of ground here today, from the hidden secrets of Bletchley Park traffic analysis to the geometry of naval gunfire, all the way to Hollywood entirely rewriting the personalities of real people.
That's a lot to take in.
It is. But when we synthesize all of this, the main takeaway for you, listening right now, is this. Sink the Bismarck is a phenomenal, engaging piece of 1960s cinema. But ultimately, it is a time capsule of the era it was made, rather than a perfectly accurate record of the era it depicts.
It shows us exactly what the 1960 British public needed to feel. And, because of the Official Secrets Act, exactly what they were legally allowed to know about how the war was actually won.
It acts as a mirror, reflecting post-war Britain's deep psychological need for a clean, heroic, uncomplicated narrative wrapped tightly around a core of real historical events.
Perfectly said.
But before we go, there was one final, incredibly intriguing detail from our sources that we have to discuss, something I want you to mull over. Because the film was produced in 1960, the filmmakers had access to actual retiring World War II warships to use as their physical sets.
Yes. Through producer John Brabourne's deep connections with the Admiralty, they gained unprecedented access. They filmed scenes on the aircraft carrier HMS Victorious, the cruiser HMS Belfast, which, survives today as a museum ship in London, and most notably, they filmed on the massive battleship HMS Vanguard.
That's incredible.
They used the actual colossal 15-inch gun turrets of the Vanguard to visually represent the sheer, terrifying firepower of these capital ships on screen.
And here's the thought I want you to walk away with today. The HMS Vanguard and many of these other spectacular ships were sent to the scrapyard shortly after filming wrapped. They were systematically broken down, their immense steel hulls melted away, completely lost to time.
It's such a shame.
Isn't it profoundly ironic that a movie, a piece of Hollywood entertainment filled with fictional captains, altered timelines, and state-mandated intelligence cover-ups, ironically becomes the most tangible, authentic visual record we have left of the very machines that fought the war?
Wow.
When you watch those massive guns fire and sink the Bismarck, you aren't just looking at a clever movie trop. You are looking at the ghosts of the real steel behemoths, captured on celluloid right before they vanished forever.
It is a powerful, almost haunting reminder that sometimes the artifice of fiction is the only mechanism we have left to preserve the physical truth of the past.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. Stay curious, keep exploring the layers beneath the narrative, and always question the history you see on screen. Until next time.